The snow was falling sideways. Thick, heavy flakes pounded the windshield as Will Carter squinted through the wipers, his old pickup grumbling down the empty road. It was nearly midnight, and all he wanted was a hot shower and the comfort of silence. Until he saw her. A woman, walking alone on the shoulder, barefoot in the snow, wearing what looked like a torn wedding dress. For a second, Will thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Maybe he was just tired. But as he slowed down, the image became clearer. Soaked lace clinging to her legs, a strap half torn, hair wild and tangled with snow. She didn't look back, just kept walking, arms wrapped tight around herself, like she was holding herself together. Will's hand hovered over the wheel. He wasn't the type to get involved, not since Sarah passed, not since everything changed. But this wasn't just someone who looked lost. This was someone who looked like they were running from something or someone and losing. He pulled over. The woman froze when the headlights shifted. Will rolled down his window halfway, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, are you all right?" She didn't answer, just stood there, shivering, not meeting his eyes. "I'm not here to bother you," he said gently. It's too cold to be out here like that. There's a diner a few miles back, or I could give you a ride somewhere." Still nothing. Then, after a few seconds, she gave the faintest nod. Will got out, walked slowly to the passenger door, opened it. She slid in wordlessly, like a ghost moving through water. Up close, she looked even more fragile. Blue lips, scratches on her arm, mascara streaked down her cheek. But her back was straight. Like pride was the only thing holding her up. They drove in silence. No names, no questions, just the hum of the heater and the storm outside. Will tried not to look at her too long, but he couldn't help it. There was something raw in her presence, like a wound that hadn't closed and maybe didn't want to. After a while, he cleared his throat. "Name's Will. I live not far from here. Got a guest room if you need to rest." She finally spoke. Her voice was low and dry. "I don't have anywhere to go." He nodded slowly. "All right, then you can stay tonight. Warm up, figure things out in the morning." She turned to him for the first time, just briefly. Her eyes were tired but sharp, searching. "Why are you helping me?" Will didn't answer right away. The truth was, he wasn't sure. But something about her, something he couldn't name, reminded him of a night years ago, when he was the one barely holding it together. And Sarah had wrapped a blanket around him, poured him tea, and said, "You don't have to know someone to be kind." "I've been lost before," he said finally. Didn't like the feeling. The woman looked away, blinking fast. They drove the rest of the way in silence. But it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It was the kind that holds space. For hurt, for breath, for whatever comes next. Will pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the modest one-story house tucked behind a row of leafless oaks. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, like the house itself was blinking awake to meet its unexpected guest. He glanced over. She was staring straight ahead, unmoving, still wrapped in silence and a soaked dress that didn't belong to her anymore, if it ever had. "Come on in," he said softly, opening his door. "You'll freeze if you stay out here." She hesitated for a moment, then followed. Inside, the house smelled like cedarwood and faint lavender. A forgotten candle on the table. Worn but clean furniture. A shelf full of books and framed drawings, some childish, some almost professional. The kind of home that had been lived in, loved in. "Shoes off by the door," Will added quietly out of habit. "I'll get you a blanket." She obeyed without speaking, toes red from the cold, dress dripping onto the rug. Will returned with a thick flannel blanket and handed it to her. She clutched it tightly, her hands trembling just a little. "I can throw something in the dryer if you want to change," he offered. "My late wife. Some of her things are still in the closet, if that's not too weird." That made her look at him. Not long, just enough to let something flicker behind her eyes. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Will led her to the guest room. He didn't hover, just pointed toward the closet and turned to leave. Before he stepped out, she spoke again. "Elena, my name's Elena." He paused, turned back. "Good to meet you, Elena." She managed a tired, almost invisible smile. "You too, Will." Later, as he stood in the kitchen pouring hot water over 2 tea bags, he caught sight of the snow still falling through the window. Everything outside was quiet, blanketed in white. Inside, the heater groaned softly, and he could hear faint movement from the guest room, drawers opening, floorboards creaking, the sound of someone trying to feel safe. When she returned, she wore an old grey sweater of Sarah's. It hung loose on her, sleeves too long, but she didn't seem to mind. He handed her the tea. "Hope peppermint's okay." "It's perfect." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The steam rose between them like a fog. They weren't quite ready to break through. But they didn't look away this time. Will cleared his throat. "So, that dress, you want to talk about it?" Elena stared into her tea, fingers wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in her life. "I was supposed to be someone's perfect bride," she said quietly. "But I didn't want to be. I didn't love him. I didn't even really know him." Will didn't press, she went on, her voice steadier than before. "I worked for him, styling, designing. He got used to me being around, told me I looked the part, that I was convenient, pretty, safe. He said it like he was offering me a promotion." Will blinked. "That's not love, that's a job description." A dry laugh escaped her lips, unexpected but real. "Yeah, I ran. I didn't even plan it. I just left and kept walking." "Well," Will said, leaning back in his chair, "that took guts." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Or desperation." He shrugged. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. After a while, Elena whispered, "I don't know what happens next." Will gave a soft nod. "Me neither, but I've got coffee in the morning, a warm place to sleep tonight, and some space if you need to breathe." She looked down, tears threatening to return. But not from fear this time. From something quieter, something closer to relief. "Okay," she said, "well, thank you." Will stood, taking both mugs to the sink. He didn't ask more. Didn't need to. He knew the feeling of not knowing what tomorrow held. He'd lived in that feeling for years. Before she turned toward the guest room again, Elena paused. "This sweater, it was hers, wasn't it?" Will nodded. "She had good taste," Eleanor said softly. Then she disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a trace of peppermint and the faint sound of her door closing. Will turned off the light, standing alone in the kitchen for a long moment. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone. The smell of pancakes drifted through the house long before the sun fully climbed over the trees. Will was already in the kitchen, flipping the last batch onto a plate when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting Charlie, but it was Elena. She stood at the edge of the room in Sarah's sweater, her hair tied back in a makeshift bun, eyes still shadowed with exhaustion. But there was colour in her cheeks this morning, a hint of life that hadn't been there the night before. "I hope it's okay I'm up," she said, voice barely louder than the sizzle of the skillet. Will gave a small smile. "You're in the kitchen, that means you're family now." That made her smile, just barely. She moved slowly, like someone unsure of her place in a room that wasn't hers. But she looked around, really looked, and took in the little details. The fridge covered in kid drawings and old magnets, the chipped ceramic bowl on the table full of clementines, the calendar with a circled date that had long since passed. "This was her kitchen, wasn't it?" she asked softly. Will nodded. "Still is in some ways, but it's also Charlie's now. And mine. And maybe yours too if you want coffee." "I always want coffee." He poured her a mug. She held it like it might slip through her fingers if she didn't grip it with both hands. A moment later a door creaked down the hallway, then the light steps of a child. Charlie padded into the kitchen with her usual early morning hair, blonde curls sticking out in every direction, and wearing pyjamas covered in tiny stars. She froze when she saw Elena. Will glanced at his daughter. "Hey kiddo, this is Elena. She's staying with us for a little while." Charlie looked up at Elena, eyes cautious but curious. Elena crouched down slowly so they were eye level. "Hi," she said gently. "I'm kind of new here too." Charlie tilted her head, still sizing her up. "Are you a friend?" Eleanor hesitated for half a second. "I hope so." Charlie nodded, like that was a good enough answer, then climbed onto the stool at the counter. "Dad makes the best pancakes," she said seriously. "But only if you tell him you're hungry. If you don't, he'll just keep asking if you want toast." Will rolled his eyes. "Snitch." Eleanor laughed, really laughed this time. And something in the room shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just a soft opening, a door unlatched, a breath let out. "Okay then," she said, sitting beside Charlie. "I'm definitely hungry." Charlie passed her the syrup without being asked. Later, after breakfast, the three of them stayed around the table longer than they needed to. Charlie showed Elena her drawing pad, flipping through pages of doodles and half-finished ideas. Will listened quietly as Elena asked thoughtful questions about each one, treating Charlie's crayon suns and stick figure horses like gallery pieces. Charlie lit up. She hadn't done that in a long time. By the time Will started clearing dishes, something had settled between them. Something unspoken but unmistakable. A kind of comfort that didn't have to be earned. It just showed up, warm and unexpected, like a sunbeam through the kitchen window. As Charlie ran off to get dressed for school, Eleanor looked down at the last pancake on her plate, then up at Will. "I didn't think I'd be able to breathe again so soon." Will wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "You don't have to rush. No one's asking you to be okay overnight." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's the kindest thing anyone's said to me in a long time." She stood, carried her plate to the sink, then paused, fingers resting on the edge of the counter. "I like it here," she whispered. Will didn't say anything, just nodded once, and in the quiet that followed there was no need to explain why. It started with a weed. Eleanor had stepped outside to get some air while Charlie was at school. Will had offered to drive her into town to pick up a few things, but she'd politely declined. She wasn't ready to face stares or strangers. Not yet. The quiet backyard felt safer. She wandered to the far corner of the yard, where a low, weathered fence half surrounded a patch of tangled green. At first, she thought it was just an overgrown space, forgotten like so many things left behind after loss. But then she saw them, rusted garden tools leaning against a wooden bench. A cracked ceramic pot with faded sunflowers painted on its side. A small sign barely legible anymore, the word bloom etched into the wood. It wasn't just a patch of weeds, it had been a garden. Carefully, she crouched down and pulled at a stubborn thistle. The soil beneath was dry, but not dead, just tired. She knew that feeling. Will found her an hour later, kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed. A small pile of dead roots beside her. He stood on the porch with a mug in hand, watching quietly before speaking. "That was Sarah's spot." Elena looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I figured. She used to say it was the only place where the world made sense." Eleanor gave a small smile. She was right. There's something about digging in the dirt that feels honest. He stepped down, handed her the mug. "It's chamomile. Hope that works." She took it with a nod. "You're getting to know me fast." Will shrugged. "I just go with what feels right." She looked back at the garden. "I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't even know what half these plants are." "You don't have to," he said. "You're here. That's a start." The next afternoon, Charlie joined her. Eleanor had found a small spade in the shed and was clearing a space along the edge when Charlie appeared with a pair of gloves 2 sizes too big and a determined look on her face. "Can I help?" Elena hesitated just for a second, then smiled. "I'd love that." They worked side by side, digging, pulling, laughing when Charlie lost her balance and fell backward into a pile of leaves. Eleanor taught her how to loosen the soil gently, how to check if roots were still alive. And when Charlie asked if they could plant something new, Eleanor paused, wiped her hands on her jeans and said, "Yes, but only if we pick it together." Inside, watching from the window, Will saw them, Eleanor and Charlie. One with her hair tied up in a loose knot, the other wearing a superhero t-shirt and boots 2 inches too big, both with dirt on their cheeks, sunlight in their hair, and something between them that hadn't been there before. Connection. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, it was just growing. Later that evening, over spaghetti and salad, Charlie told Will all about their garden plans. "We're going to plant lavender and wildflowers," she said through a mouthful of noodles. "And maybe tomatoes. Eleanor says they're stubborn but worth it." Will looked across the table at Elena, who smiled, quietly amused. "She's a fast learner," Eleanor said. "Comes from her mum," Will replied softly. There was a beat of silence, warm, not awkward. Eleanor reached for her glass. And her dad, clearly. That night, after Charlie had gone to bed, Will walked out to the back porch and found Elena there, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea under the porch light. "Thank you," she said before he could speak. "For what?" "For letting me help with something that mattered to her." Will sat down beside her. "You're helping more than you know?" The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees. The garden behind them lay quiet, but not forgotten. And in the dark earth something had been planted. Not just seeds, but a beginning. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of morning that felt like nothing could go wrong. Blue sky, fresh air, the sound of birds instead of traffic. Eleanor had just finished watering the garden with Charlie when Will called out from the front door. "Eleanor, someone's asking for you." She froze. Her hands were still wrapped around the old green watering can. Charlie was holding a packet of wildflower seeds they were planning to plant that afternoon. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked too quickly. Will's expression had already shifted, calm but wary, protective. "Some guy in a suit, says his name's Daniel." Her stomach dropped. Charlie glanced up, puzzled. "Do you know him?" Eleanor didn't answer. She set the watering can down slowly and wiped her hands on her jeans, though they were already dry. Will stepped aside as she walked to the porch. A sleek black car idled in the driveway. And there he was, Daniel Vance. Impeccable blazer, sunglasses, phone in hand, looking entirely out of place next to Will's weathered truck and the wind chimes swaying in the breeze. "Elena," Daniel said, smiling like this was a business meeting. "There you are." She stopped halfway across the yard. "You shouldn't be here." "I disagree," he said smoothly. "You vanished in the middle of a very high-profile event. People have questions. Investors have concerns. You embarrassed Theo in front of half the industry." "I'm not his possession," she said quietly. Daniel took off his sunglasses. "No, but you were his partner, his stylist, his fiancée if you'd accepted the offer. You made us all look ridiculous." Will stepped forward, voice calm but solid. "You need to leave." Daniel raised a brow, glanced around like he was just now taking in the scenery. "And you are?" "I'm the man she's safe with," Will replied. "That's all you need to know." Daniel smirked, but his tone tightened. "Look, Elena, this little runaway act might feel freeing now, but you're still under contract. Your NDA doesn't disappear just because you got cold feet." "I didn't run because I was scared," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I ran because I couldn't pretend anymore. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone you and Theo molded. I couldn't live in that world another day." "You owe him an explanation." "No," she said, "I owe myself a life." There was a beat of silence. Daniel looked at her like she was a child who didn't understand the rules. But Elena wasn't that woman anymore. "I won't go back," she said, steady now. "I'm done being curated and branded and sold like a piece of furniture. I'm not someone's look, I'm a person." Daniel slipped his sunglasses back on, face unreadable. "Fine," he said, "but this isn't over." As he turned and walked back to the car, Will moved closer, standing beside her but not touching. Just there, solid, grounded. The car door slammed, the engine purred, then pulled away. Only when the sound faded did Elena exhale. Charlie came out onto the porch a second later, worry in her eyes. "Was that the bad guy?" Eleanor gave a small, tired laugh. "Not bad, just part of something I don't want to go back to." Charlie nodded like she understood. She walked over and slipped her small hand into Elena's. "I like you better here." Eleanor blinked fast. Her throat tightened. She squeezed Charlie's hand gently and smiled. "Me too." That evening the garden felt different, not quieter, but braver. Like something had been faced and left behind for good. Will brewed tea. Eleanor sat beside him on the porch steps, wrapped in the same flannel blanket he'd offered her that first night. "You okay?" he asked. "I am now." He looked at her, not pushing, just waiting. I think I needed to be reminded of what I walked away from," she said. "To be sure, I won't ever go back." "You won't," he said simply. "You're stronger than you think." She turned to him, eyes softer. "So are you." Will smiled, then looked toward the garden. The wind moved gently through the trees. They sat there for a long time. No plans, no pressure, just two people letting the quiet settle around them. And inside that quiet, something real was beginning to take root. Elena didn't leave. She could have. After Daniel showed up, it would have been easy to pack her things and slip away in the night again. But she didn't. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to run. The next few days moved slowly, like the air after a heavy rain. Things weren't perfect, but they felt possible, real. She started waking up before Will and Charlie, taking coffee out onto the porch, sitting with the morning light on her face like it was something sacred. She'd stopped looking over her shoulder. One afternoon, she walked down to the town's little non-profit centre. It was tucked between an old laundromat and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and warm dough. A handwritten sign on the window read, "Looking for volunteers." She stepped inside. The centre was small but filled with life. Shelves of donated clothes, a bulletin board covered in job listings and handwritten notes. An older woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. Can I help you, sweetheart? Eleanor hesitated for just a second, then stepped forward. I was wondering if you needed help. I've got experience with styling, organising, just being where I'm needed. The woman's name was May. She asked no questions about Elena's past, just handed her a clipboard and said, "We always need people who care." That was how it started. A few hours a week sorting clothes, helping teens find something to wear to interviews, sitting with women who needed to talk more than they needed a coat. It wasn't glamorous, but it made her feel like a person again. Like she had value that wasn't tied to her appearance, her title, or someone else's expectations. At home, her bond with Charlie grew stronger by the day. They read together in the evenings, Eleanor patiently sounding out words when Charlie stumbled. They painted small clay pots and filled them with herbs for the kitchen windowsill. They built a scarecrow out of Will's old flannel and laughed so hard Charlie fell over in the grass. One night, after brushing her teeth and putting on pyjamas, Charlie peeked into the living room and whispered, "Can I sleep on the couch near you tonight?" Elena smiled, pulling the blanket open. "Of course." Charlie curled up beside her, head resting on Elena's shoulder. And before drifting off, she whispered, "Mum used to sing me a song when I was sad." Elena didn't know the song, but she hummed something soft anyway. Will came home later and found them both asleep, Charlie's hand resting on Elena's arm, their breathing steady, matching. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching. Something inside him ached, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't grief this time. It was something gentler, a kind of hope he hadn't felt since the world fell apart. The next morning, as Elena packed a small tote bag to head to the centre, Will leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand. "You're good at that," he said. "At what?" "Showing up, being there for people." Eleanor laughed lightly. "I used to think I had to be everything for everyone. Perfect, polished, prepared. Now I just try to be present." Will nodded. "I like this version of you." She looked at him, something vulnerable flickering behind her eyes. "So do I." And in that quiet, sunlit kitchen, between the toast and the coffee and the shared silence, it felt like they were no longer standing on opposite sides of a story. They were beginning to write the same one. It was Sunday morning when the envelope arrived. Will had been sorting through the small box of mail sitting on the sideboard, mostly bills, local flyers, and one old catalogue Charlie liked to cut up for her collages. He almost missed it. A cream-coloured envelope, no return address, just his name in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He turned it over. His hands stilled. The handwriting was Sarah's. Eleanor was in the backyard with Charlie, helping her build a little wind chime out of tin lids and string. Will sat down at the kitchen table, heart thudding slow and heavy. He opened it. Inside was a letter, short, folded once, dated 3 months before Sarah passed. "Will, if you're reading this, it means time got ahead of us. I hate that. But I also know you'll bury yourself in quiet, thinking that protecting your heart means never opening it again. Don't. One day, someone's going to come into your life who doesn't need fixing. She'll be broken in ways you understand, but strong in ways you forgot you could be. And when that day comes, let her in. Help her grow. And let her help you do the same. Love always, Sarah." Will sat still for a long time, the letter resting on the table like it was made of something heavier than paper. Later that day, after Charlie went to bed, he found Elena on the porch again, her usual spot when the sun dipped low and the sky turned lavender. She had a blanket over her lap and a mug between her hands. He sat beside her, the letter folded in his jacket pocket. "You ever think someone knew something, long before you did?" he asked quietly. Eleanor glanced over, curious. "Like what?" Will paused. "Like they saw a version of you couldn't imagine yet." She smiled faintly. "I think the people who love us do that all the time." He nodded, fingers tightening slightly on the edge of his seat. "I found a letter today from Sarah." Eleanor turned fully toward him now. She didn't say anything, just waited. She said, "One day someone would come into my life, someone I'd want to protect but who didn't need saving, someone who would help me grow." He looked up, his voice soft. "I think it's you." Eleanor didn't move. Her eyes were shining now, but she didn't blink them away. "I'm still figuring things out," she said. "I know. I'm still scared some mornings, still waiting for the other shoe to drop." "So am I," he said. They sat there, two people who had both lost something they couldn't name and found something they didn't expect. After a long pause, Eleanor whispered, "She sounds like she loved you deeply." "She did," Will replied. "But she also knew love wasn't about holding on forever. Sometimes it's about letting go so someone else can find their way again." Eleanor reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a small silver charm. "I found this in the garden the other day," she said, "buried under the rosemary. It's a little tarnished, but I think it belonged to her." Will took it gently, turning it over in his hand. It was a tiny pendant in the shape of a leaf, one he remembered Sarah wearing every fall. "She used to say everything that falls has a purpose," he said. They didn't say much after that, just shared the quiet, the warmth of being close without pressure, the slow rhythm of two people starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were allowed to begin again. It started with silence. Charlie had been unusually quiet all afternoon. No running through the hallway, no dramatic storytelling, no asking for snacks every 10 minutes. Will noticed it first but didn't say anything. He'd learnt to trust her rhythms. Eleanor was in the kitchen, folding dish towels, when Charlie tiptoed in holding something behind her back. "Can I show you something?" she asked, voice small but serious. Eleanor smiled and knelt down. "Of course, sweetie." Charlie slowly revealed a piece of thick drawing paper. It was colourful, edges worn where she'd erased and redrawn again and again. In the centre was a house, lopsided and cosy, with flowers in the yard, a big tree with a swing, and 3 figures standing in front of it. Will, Charlie, and Elena. They were holding hands. Eleanor blinked, caught completely off guard. "Did you draw this?" Charlie nodded. "I wanted it to be right. That's why it took me all day." Eleanor stared at the paper. Her figure had curly hair and a blue sweater, just like the one she'd worn last week. Will had his usual flannel. Charlie had a huge smile and was wearing a cape. "I wasn't sure if I should add you at first," Charlie said, twisting the hem of her shirt. "But then I thought, you live with us now. And you helped fix the garden, and you make the house feel warm again." Eleanor couldn't speak for a moment. Then she gently pulled Charlie into a hug. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she whispered. Charlie pulled back just enough to look at her. "Do you like being with us?" "I love being with you." Will had been standing in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. Just watched Elena hold his daughter with the kind of tenderness you can't fake. Later that night, Elena framed the drawing and hung it near the front door. Will raised an eyebrow as she adjusted the picture to make sure it was straight. "You sure about that? It's going to be the first thing people see." "That's the point," Eleanor said softly. "It's the first thing I want to see." The next morning, Charlie came into the kitchen and saw the framed picture for the first time. "You hung it up?" Eleanor knelt down beside her. "I wanted everyone who walks through that door to know this is our home." Charlie threw her arms around her again, tighter this time. Will just watched them, his heart full in a way that almost hurt. Because it was real, because it was happening, and because he knew now that he wasn't the only one holding on to the idea of family. It was being drawn, built, loved by all of them. The drawing stayed on the wall by the front door. Sometimes Elena caught herself pausing in front of it on the way to the kitchen, smiling without realising. Charlie had added stickers to the frame, little gold stars and a crooked rainbow. It didn't match the decor, but no one seemed to care. Life in the house had settled into a rhythm. Soft mornings, laughter in the garden, Charlie's backpack by the door, shoes always kicked off in the wrong place, Elena humming to herself in the kitchen, Will chopping wood out back, sleeves rolled up, face flushed from the cold. They weren't a perfect family, but they were something. And for Will, that something had begun to feel like everything. He hadn't said it out loud yet. Not because he was unsure, but because he didn't want to rush her. Elena had come into their lives like a quiet storm, unexpected, healing and real. And he knew enough about grief to understand that sometimes love grows best in silence. But that night something shifted. They were in the living room. Charlie had fallen asleep between them during movie night, her head resting on Elena's leg. The credits rolled, soft music playing in the background, but neither of them moved. Will looked over. Eleanor's hand was gently brushing through Charlie's hair, her face calm, eyes half closed. She looked peaceful, like she finally belonged to herself again. "I don't want to mess this up," Will said quietly. Elena turned her head, surprised. "Mess what up?" "This," he said, gesturing lightly toward the room, toward her. "Us, whatever this is." Elena's eyes softened. "You haven't." He hesitated. "I care about you, a lot, but I don't want to make you feel like you owe me something, or that you're expected to." She reached across Charlie, touched his hand gently. "You don't have to tiptoe, Will." He let out a breath he hadn't realised he was holding. "I think I started falling for you the night you made pancakes," he said, half smiling. "But I knew it for sure when you stayed, even after Daniel showed up. even after you had every reason to walk away. Eleanor looked down, quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't know what I'm ready for exactly, but I know I feel safe here. I know I care about you too. Will nodded slowly. That's enough. I'm not asking for anything more than what's honest. Just tell me if it ever changes. She gave him a look so soft it almost undid him. I will. They sat like that for a while longer, the quiet warm between them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, rustling the garden they'd started to rebuild together. Will leaned back, looked up at the ceiling, then laughed under his breath. What? Elena asked. He smiled. I think Sarah would have liked you. She smiled back. I think I would have liked her too. They didn't kiss, they didn't rush. They just sat there, hands loosely linked, with Charlie asleep between them, and something unspoken finally spoken. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was better. It was real. The first day of spring came quietly. No dramatic bloom, no sudden warmth. Just a shift in the air, a softness in the light, a feeling that something was slowly changing. Eleanor noticed it first, she always did. That morning, she stood barefoot in the backyard, still in her robe, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The garden was just beginning to wake up, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil she and Charlie had worked so hard to clear. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Will stepped out, holding his own coffee, hair still tousled from sleep. You've made this place come alive again. Eleanor smiled, eyes still on the garden. No, we did. Charlie came bounding out moments later, carrying her drawing pad and a handful of crayons. She plopped down in the grass and began sketching the garden with intense focus. Will and Elena watched her in silence. A few minutes later, Eleanor turned to him. There's something I want to tell you. He raised an eyebrow. Should I sit down? She laughed. Maybe. They both sat on the back steps, shoulder to shoulder. I had a phone call last week, she began. It was from a friend in the city, a real job offer. Styling again. A fresh start. Will tried to hide the way his chest tightened. And? I said no. He looked over. Are you sure? Eleanor nodded, slow and certain. For the first time in my life, I'm not chasing something I think I'm supposed to want. I'm not running toward applause or away from fear. I'm choosing what feels right. Will didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, and what feels right? She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small house key. The spare Will had given her weeks ago, still on the plain silver ring. I want to be here, not just staying over. Here, with you, with Charlie, with this life we're building. Will blinked once, then again. The kind of blink a man makes when he's trying to hold emotion at bay. He reached for her hand, no rush, no pressure, just warmth. You already were, he said softly, but I'm glad you know it now too. Charlie looked up from her sketch, eyes squinting in the sun. Are you guys gonna kiss or what? Eleanor laughed, shaking her head. Maybe later, artist in residence. Charlie grinned and went back to colouring. That afternoon, Eleanor baked banana bread while Will fixed the loose hinge on the back gate. Charlie added a new drawing to the fridge. A garden in full bloom with hearts floating above it. And that night, after dinner, Eleanor tucked Charlie into bed, just like Sarah used to do. Will stood at the door, watching as Elena smoothed the blanket and kissed Charlie's forehead. Good night, my sweet girl. Charlie opened one sleepy eye. I'm glad you stayed. Eleanor touched her hair. Me too. When they turned off the lights, the house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like home. Not because it was perfect, not because there were no ghosts left in the corners, but because it had become a place where healing was allowed, where no one had to be fixed, just seen, loved, chosen. And in the quiet of that night, as the wind rustled the garden and the stars blinked softly above, 3 people under one roof slept in peace. No longer broken, just whole. Sometimes life doesn't give us a clean beginning. Sometimes we're handed a mess, grief, regret, a torn wedding dress in the middle of a snowstorm. But maybe the beauty of life isn't in how perfect it starts, but in the moment we choose to stay, to show up, to grow something real from what was once broken. This story reminded me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who see you as you are and still open the door. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll stay for the next one. Here at Rain Inside, we believe that quiet stories can still speak the loudest. So if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, and if you've been here before, thank you for coming back. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you again soon in the next story.